The morning began with a cold wind sweeping over the Montana plains. Dust lifted from the long gravel road that led to the Dutton ranch, catching the light of the rising sun. John Dutton stood at the porch, his weathered face turned toward the sound of an approaching vehicle. It wasn't a ranch truck. It wasn't one of the hands. This was something else. A black Mercedes-Benz crawled up the drive, polished and out of place among the rugged trucks and rusted tools of the working land. It stopped in front of the house, and a tall man in a navy blue suit stepped out, leather briefcase in hand. He adjusted his tie with an air of authority, his eyes scanning the surroundings with mild disdain. John didn't move. He simply stared. "Mr. Dutton," the man began, offering a hand that John ignored. "My name is Richard Claiborne. I'm an executive representative from Western Plains Bank. I'm here to discuss your outstanding debt and—" John's silence was like a wall. Claiborne cleared his throat. "We've tried to reach you through letters, calls. This ranch is months behind on payments. The board has authorized foreclosure. Effective today." John looked past Claiborne, toward the barn, then to the mountains in the distance. Finally he spoke. "This land's been in my family for 6 generations. You think a paper and a title change that?" Claiborne chuckled. "Mr. Dutton, the world doesn't run on blood anymore. It runs on numbers. And your numbers don't add up." He handed John a thick folder. Inside were foreclosure documents, asset evaluations, and the bank's claim of ownership. John flipped through it slowly, then handed it back. "You boys always think it's about the money." Claiborne smirked. "It usually is." John turned, walking off without another word. Claiborne called after him. "I'll be back with the sheriff if necessary. You have 48 hours to vacate." John didn't look back. He disappeared into the barn. Inside it was dark, lit only by shafts of sunlight cutting through the wooden slats. John moved to a wall covered with old tack and ropes. Behind a false panel, he revealed a rusted iron door. He hadn't opened it in over 30 years. He spun the combination dial. It clanked and clicked until finally, with a deep groan, the door creaked open. Inside was a vault, small but solid, inherited from his father and his father before him. John lit a lantern. Dust swirled. Inside were ledgers, letters, maps. But one file, wrapped in oilskin, sat atop them all. It bore the seal of the United States Department of the Interior, dated 1952. John opened it. Deeds. Original land patents. Receipts of sale from settlers long gone. And most damning of all, a notarized affidavit detailing the illegal transfer of 3,200 acres, land the bank now claimed. The bank's predecessor had stolen it, and John's father had documented everything. John stared at the pages, his jaw tightening. The fire in his chest wasn't rage, it was justice waking from a long sleep. He placed the documents in a new folder, locked the vault, and walked out into the light. The Duttons don't raise their voices. They raise hell when the time calls for it. John Dutton didn't waste time. As the sun crept higher over the peaks, he moved with deliberate calm through the house, retrieved his father's old briefcase, and slid the documents inside. Every page, every signature, every fatal mark was a weapon, and John knew how to use them. He called Rip. "Get the boys ready. I need a ride into town, and I want you close." Rip Wheeler, loyal to fault, understood without asking questions. Within minutes, a convoy of dust-covered trucks rumbled to life. They weren't just heading into town. They were heading into battle. Bozeman, Montana, had changed. Once a ranching hub, it now played host to coffee shops, tech startups, and urban developers with plans to modernize the land. But some corners still belonged to the old world. John parked outside the county records office, his boots echoing sharply as he stepped into the marble-floored building. The clerk looked up, startled. "Mr. Dutton." "I need a certified notary and the property registrar." The clerk rushed off. Minutes later, 2 nervous officials stood before him. John opened the briefcase and laid out the original deeds, the maps, and the federal documents. "What you're looking at," he said, "is proof that the land Western Plains Bank claims was never theirs to begin with. It was stolen, and I'm filing a motion to nullify their ownership on the grounds of fraud." They read in silence. Pages turned. Faces paled. This changes everything," one of them muttered. "It doesn't change anything," John corrected. "It restores what was always true." That same day, John walked into the county courthouse. He filed the paperwork himself. Not through a lawyer, not through a proxy, through the same hands that worked the land. Outside, a reporter noticed the stir. A young woman with a camera crew flagged John down. "Mr. Dutton, is it true you're suing Western Plains Bank?" John paused. "I'm not suing them. I'm exposing them." The clip aired on local news that evening. By morning, it was national. Across the state, families who had lost land to foreclosure began calling the courthouse. Some recognized the bank's tactics. Some recognized the names on John's documents. One man, a retired surveyor, brought forward his own evidence. More dominoes began to fall. At the Dutton Ranch, phones rang nonstop. Lawyers offered help. Politicians asked for statements. But John remained quiet. He spent his time walking the fields with Tate, riding the fence lines with Rip, watching the herd move like waves across the plains. And then the banker returned. This time, Claiborne brought company. 2 attorneys, a PR rep, and a deputy. They walked up the drive like invaders on sacred ground. "You've made quite a mess," Claiborne said. John didn't reply. He handed the deputy a folder, copies of everything he filed. The deputy flipped through it, looked at John, then at Claiborne. "This is federal. Out of my hands." Claiborne's PR woman stepped forward. "We'd like to settle." Quietly. John looked her dead in the eye. "You think this is about silence?" They offered money. Land trades. Public apologies. John refused them all. "My father didn't fight in Korea to come home and be robbed by a bank in a suit. My grandfather didn't bleed into this soil for it to be priced by square foot." He turned to walk away. "You'll regret this," Claiborne called. John stopped. "You already do." By week's end, Western Plains Bank was under federal investigation. Claiborne resigned. 3 executives were subpoenaed, and a Senate subcommittee on rural land fraud was scheduled, with John Dutton as its first witness. But he didn't go to Washington. He sent the documents and a letter. "I don't need a microphone to speak the truth," it read. "I have the land, and it remembers everything." The ranch was safe, for now, but the fight had awakened something bigger, a reckoning. And John Dutton was ready for it. He met with former landowners, gave them copies of his findings, helped them file their own cases. A wave of restitution cases swept across the county. What began as a personal battle became a movement. When a national television crew arrived to cover the story, they found John branding cattle at sunrise. They asked him why he did it all. "Because legacy doesn't come with a title," he said. "It comes with scars." And the camera caught something rare, John Dutton, staring at the land like it was speaking back. That night, the segment aired to millions. And in the silence of Montana, a storm was coming, not of rain, but of reckoning. And John Dutton would be its thunder. It started with a letter, simple, typed formal. An invitation cloaked in civility, yet laced with a summons. "Mr. John Dutton, you are requested to appear before the United States Senate Subcommittee on Rural Property Fraud and Institutional Corruption." John read the line 3 times before folding the letter neatly and placing it in his father's old desk drawer. He stared at the wooden grains, scratched, scarred, honest, and whispered, "This ain't over." Word spread fast. News trucks began camping near the ranch. Drones buzzed like flies. The gate was locked, guards posted, and Rip personally turned away anyone who didn't wear boots with mud. John sat with Beth one evening, fire crackling in the hearth. She poured whiskey, handed him a glass. "You gonna go?" she asked. "I already did," he said quietly. "With every document I sent. I made my case with truth. If they want me there in person, they'll get the weight of every Dutton that came before me." The flight to D.C. was quiet. Rain pattered the jet's windows. John watched the storm in silence. The capital was colder than Montana, not in weather, in soul. Men wore smiles with knives behind them. Hallways echoed with polished shoes and forgotten promises. John entered the hearing room like a lion steps into a cage, not with fear, but with warning. The chairman adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Dutton, we thank you for your presence." John said nothing. "We've reviewed the evidence you provided. It's extensive. It's damning." John finally spoke. "It's the truth, and truth don't need embellishment." Flashbulbs popped. Reporters scribbled. A senator asked, "Why didn't you come forward earlier?" "I did," John said. "With a rifle, when they first tried to fence my land. With silence, when they mocked my family name. With a vault, when they pushed too far." The chamber fell quiet. "Do you consider yourself a patriot, Mr. Dutton?" "No," he answered. "I consider myself a son. Of this soil. Of sacrifice. That ought to mean something." An aide handed him a stack of rebuttal documents. John didn't flinch. You think I care what some clerk wrote from behind a desk? He held up a deed, yellowed with age. This is what built this country. The crowd behind the press table clapped. The chairman banged his gavel. You're not here to rally populists, Mr. Dutton. I'm here so men like you don't forget the price of what you legislate. Outside the courtroom, news anchors called him the modern Cincinnatus, the cowboy who broke the banks. But John didn't stay for praise. He walked out, past the marble pillars, into the rain. He turned his collar up and whispered, my father would have spit on that floor. Back home, the ranch was waiting. But the world had shifted. Court orders arrived nullifying Western Plains Bank's claims. Claiborne was indicted. His assets frozen. A special prosecutor was named. Still, John felt no triumph. Only resolve. He met with the other landowners. In a packed barn lit by lanterns, he spoke. This ain't about vengeance. It's about restoration. And if any of you think this ends with a press release, you don't know what legacy means. They listened. He launched a trust, the Dutton Land Stewardship Fund, designed to protect generational ranches from corporate acquisition. Donations poured in. So did threats. One night, shots rang near the cattle pens. John and Rip rode out, rifles drawn. They found tire tracks, cigarette butts, and a note. Walk away, Dutton. John burned it. They want war. Let's show 'em what one looks like. He hired investigators, traced the threats to a shadow group linked to a major real estate conglomerate. Beth took the lead, aggressive, merciless. Bank executives began resigning quietly. Investors pulled out. A deal for a ski resort on seized land collapsed. The Dutton name was now a brand, not of cattle, but of justice. Then came the documentary crew. They wanted to tell his story. John agreed, but only if they filmed the land. The real hero don't wear boots, he said. It grows grass and remembers blood. As cameras rolled, John sat on a ridge, Tate beside him. This ain't about fame, he told the camera. It's about reminding folks what matters when the storm comes. And the storm was far from over. Because when a Dutton defends a soil, he defends the soul. And John Dutton wasn't done fighting. The moon hung low over the Bitterroot Range, casting long silver shadows across the Dutton Ranch. Coyotes called in the distance, but the house was silent. Inside, John Dutton stood alone in the study, staring at the fire as it crackled against the stone hearth. He was holding a letter. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, scrawled on age parchment, the kind that carried weight just by existing. It read simply, "They're coming for the water, writes next. And they're not coming alone." John folded the letter slowly and placed it beside a framed photograph of his grandfather, who had died defending the land from a railroad company in 1911. That same blood now stirred in John. The next morning, the ranch was in motion. Case rode out before dawn, checking the western pastures. Monica organized a local tribal council meeting. Rip rallied the hands for fence duty, except it wasn't about fences. It was about presence. John knew what was coming. Not another lawsuit. A siege. A private security firm, Horizon Dynamics, had begun moving into the region. They weren't just mercenaries, they were corporate enforcers outfitted with surveillance tech and deep ties to land acquisition companies. Their mission, to secure areas for development under the guise of infrastructure modernization. The ranch became a fortress. Dutton allies installed surveillance blind spots, replaced cattle trails with false markers, and buried supply caches in case of blockade. Beth visited the governor. Alone. "You know what they're doing," she said. "You saw the plans. They take the water, they take the land." The governor, newly elected and already cornered by donors, hesitated. Beth slammed down the photos. "Choose a side. This ain't politics anymore. This is war." That night, John stood with Rip on the ridge overlooking the valley. "When they move," John said, "they'll expect us to fold. They always do." Rip nodded. "We won't." "No," John replied, "we'll bleed 'em dry." The next week saw unmarked trucks parked near the Dutton border. Fences were cut. Streams diverted. One of the ranch hands was beaten and left on the roadside with a warning carved into his boot, "Relocate." John called a town hall. Not in the courthouse. In the church. He stood at the pulpit, the same one where his mother once sang hymns. "They're not just coming for my ranch," he said. "They're coming for every acre that ever carried your father's sweat. They want your legacy, your soul. And if we don't stand, there'll be nothing left to kneel on." Old-timers nodded. Young ranchers clenched their jaws. And from that gathering, a new alliance formed, the Western Front, a coalition of ranchers, tribal leaders, veterans, and even ex-lawmen, all swearing to protect the valley. Horizon dynamics escalated. Helicopters buzzed the tree line. Drones monitored cattle movements. But the Duttons were always one step ahead. Tate, with his mother's guidance, mapped ancient land routes unknown to the digital eye. Beth hacked into the firm's communications. What she found was worse than John imagined: government contracts, shadow investors, and a plan labeled Operation Reservoir, set to begin in 30 days. John rode to the highest point of the ranch, Eagle's Watch. There, he opened his great-grandfather's journal. Scribbled maps. Handwritten treaties. One entry caught his eye. Water is worth more than gold. Defend it like blood. He knew what he had to do. The next day, John filed a motion in federal court under the Indigenous and Homestead Water Protection Act. With help from Monica and tribal historians, they proved that the water rights belonged not just to the Duttons, but to the ancestors who bled on that soil. Protests erupted in Helena. Ranchers rode on horseback to the state capitol. Flags waved. Songs were sung. And for the first time in decades, the sound of hooves drowned out the engines of greed. Horizon Dynamics retaliated. One night, shots were fired at the ranch. Fire scorched part of the eastern pasture. But John and Rip led the men into the flames, saving every last animal. Tate asked him, "Why do they hate us?" John knelt. "They don't hate us. They fear what we remind them, that not everything has a price." The climax came during a standoff at Three Pines Creek. Bulldozers arrived to begin surveying. John blocked them alone, mounted on his horse, holding his father's rifle. News crews arrived. Drones circled. But John didn't flinch. "They'll have to drag me off this land," he said. "And I promise I won't go easy." Just as the federal agents approached, a court order arrived, a stay of development. Signed, sealed, delivered by a judge who once rode the same land as a boy. The machines turned back, and the people erupted. Beth cried quietly. Rip smiled for the first time in weeks. Case lifted Tate onto his shoulders. And John, he looked at the mountains and whispered, "You raised the right son, old man." But as he rode back home, a new letter waited. From Washington, a national inquiry, subpoenas, and a warning. "This isn't the end, Mr. Dutton. It's the beginning." John folded, lit a match, watched it burn, and with the fire still flickering, he said, "Good." The inquiry was scheduled for early spring. Snow still blanketed the valley, but Washington buzzed with anticipation. Headlines screamed of fraud, abuse, and the rise of the last cowboy. John Dutton had become a symbol, a specter haunting the boardrooms of America's land barons. But symbols are dangerous because they inspire. In Montana, the Dutton Ranch was quiet. Too quiet. John rose before dawn, drank coffee in silence, and walked the perimeter alone. Every step reminded him of what he was protecting, not just earth, but memory. That week, 3 more ranches in neighboring counties joined the Western Front. And for every new ally, the threats grew louder. Letters, voicemails, strange cars parked near the gates. Duttons didn't scare easily, but they prepared. Rip doubled the night patrols. Case installed motion-trigger cameras. Beth kept a shotgun behind every door. In Washington, senators debated land rights reform. John was called to testify again, this time on national television. He agreed, but with a condition. The hearing would be held in Montana. On Dutton land. It was unprecedented. It was risky. And it was approved. Cameras, reporters, politicians, all arrived in droves. A massive tent was erected near the Yellowstone River, just below the ridge John called Eagle's Watch. The land became a courtroom. Beth handled logistics. Monica organized tribal support. Case led security. And John prepared to do what he'd always done, speak from the land. The morning of the hearing, he stood in front of the crowd, wind tugging at his coat. "You asked me to testify," he said, voice steady. "So here's the testimony. Look around. This isn't a backdrop. This is the truth. Every inch of this land has a name. Every drop of this river has a price in blood. And I'm not here to defend property. I'm here to defend principle." The hearing lasted 6 hours. Testimonies from veterans, native leaders, ranchers. Stories of loss, theft, and silent resilience. And when John read from his great-grandfather's journal, a passage about holding the line against the railroads, the silence was total. The next day, reform bills passed committee. But victory brought retaliation. That night, a coordinated cyber attack hit the ranch. Power went out. Data was wiped. Fences failed. Cattle scattered. It was a warning. And John received another letter. You're not saving the West. You're burying it. He burned it. 2 days later, John met with allies from Utah, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. The Western Front became official, a multi-state alliance with legal backing and its own media arm. Their goal: transparency, protection, resistance. John gave them a motto: we don't retreat, we reclaim. Meanwhile, Beth discovered a leak, someone inside their own ranks feeding information to Horizon's successor, a group called Terralex Holdings. The traitor was confronted, and John gave them a choice: exile or trial by their own conscience. They left without a word. Tensions rose. A federal convoy was spotted 10 miles from the ranch. Permits for new pipelines were quietly approved. John knew the next phase wouldn't be legal. It would be personal. He visited his father's grave. Knelt. They're coming again, Dad. This time with lawyers and drones instead of guns. But I know what you'd do. He stood up, dusted his hat, and said to no one, so I'll do the same. By month's end, Montana was a battleground, not of weapons, but of will. And John Dutton stood at the center. Because the reckoning wasn't coming. It had already begun. The final blow didn't come with guns or gavels. It came in the form of a single sentence. Executive Order 292, Requisition and Federal Control of Strategic Agricultural Zones. John read it 3 times before setting the paper down on the porch table. He looked out across the pasture where calves danced in the morning frost. Rip stood beside him, silent. They want to nationalize it, John said. Rip nodded. All of it. Beth arrived moments later, fire already in her eyes. They call it control. I call it theft. John didn't speak. He just stared at the soil beneath his boots. In Washington, Terralex lobbied hard. News pundits framed John as a stubborn relic, dangerous in his defiance. But in Montana, and far beyond, the Dutton name had become a banner. A week later, protesters marched from Livingston to Helena on horseback. Ranchers from 6 states rode with them. 1 million watched live. John Dutton didn't attend. He stayed with the land. Storm's too close, he told Case. I need to be here when it breaks. Then it did. One night, federal agents arrived with warrants and equipment. They claimed jurisdiction under the new order. John stood in the yard with Beth, Rip, and Case, unarmed, unmoved. You trespass on this land. You trespass on every Dutton who ever lived, John said. The lead agent hesitated. The wind howled. Then the gates opened, not by force, but by witness. Dozens of ranchers, tribal elders, and journalists poured in behind John. You can't bury truth, Beth said. Not here. Not ever. The agents backed down. A national uproar followed. The executive order was suspended. Investigations launched. Terralex collapsed under scrutiny. Several arrests followed, including 2 senators. John never watched the news. He fed his cattle, rode his land, and one evening, as the sun sank behind the ridgeline, he sat with Tate beneath the old cottonwood. Will they come back? Tate asked. Always, John said, but so will we. Tate looked up. What if they take it all? John smiled. Then we start again. From the soil. That's where it always begins. The final scene, John walking alone to the family cemetery. He places his hat on his father's cross. Looks out. The land remains. And so does the man who gave everything to protect it. Legacy secured. Justice earned. The West remembered.